This talk has absolutely nothing to do with prescriptive or alerting inside of ITSI. We just thought that would be a cool title to get you guys here. Sorry about that.
We're really here to tell you how you should use all your searches as index equals stars for all time.
There it is.
And make them real time. Your Splunk admin will love you forever.
All right. Okay, all right, I think it is about that time. Okay, so I'm Jeff, this is Matt, and this is a talk about prescriptive design for alerting inside of ITSI. So I'm going to first turn it over to Matt to introduce himself.
Okay, everybody, I'm Matt Hasty. I am a senior engineer on the Splunk team at GEHA. I started working on Splunk about 3 years ago. So we used to have an instance that wasn't really utilized. We didn't have a lot of people using it, and management noticed that, and they wanted to re-architect it. So I was one of the people on the ground floor when we did that. So that was about 3 years ago. We also implemented ITSI and ES at the same time. So my core responsibilities at GEHA is I'm the main ITSI admin, and I'm one of the main Splunk Enterprise admins as well. I just had a baby boy born on August 24th. His name is Corbin. He's extremely cute. My wife sent me a video this weekend, and he was reaching out to his mobile. So let me tell you just a little bit about GEHA. We're a pretty old company, about 81 years old. And what we used to be is an insurance company for railroad workers. It's since evolved, and it's become one of the largest providers of medical and dental insurance for federal civilian employees. It's a not-for-profit, so we don't have to necessarily always worry about stockholders, which is nice. We're based in Lee Summit. We have over 2 million members and about 1,500 employees, so we're a nice mid-sized company.
Okay, I am Jeff Wiedemann. I wanted to find a picture that would convey my expertise in this area, so I feel like I did that pretty good. I am a recovering software developer. Before I came to Splunk, I did 12 years developing software at a healthcare IT company in Kansas City called Cerner. I've got like terrible imposter syndrome. I'm a big time self-deprecator, so I don't often call myself an expert. I don't like doing that, but I will say that from an ITSI perspective, I am an expert. I know the product both functionally and technically very well. If anybody in the room does know me or know of me, it's likely from some blogs that I've written that have gotten a lot of traction at Splunk. Ensuring Success with ITSI was a 3-part blog series where I just went over some of the basic foundational best practices for thresholding, alerting, and then adaptive thresholding. There was not a lot of documentation around adaptive thresholding, and so I knew I needed to address that in that blog. And then more recently, a blueprint for Splunk ITSI alerting, which sounds very similar to the title of this talk today. So, I don't know what that means. But and then I'm kind of a nerd, so I've really started to dig into the thresholding, because that thresholding's hard, right? And it's I think that there's a little bit lacking in ITSI right now for the service owners and admins to do really good thresholding. So I built some stuff up, and that's kind of an interesting process. So if you want to talk to me about thresholding afterwards, I would totally talk to you about that. So I'm at, what was it, maybe like 2 years ago?
Yeah, about 2 years.
Yeah, so what happened was kind of a cool story. I wanted to share it. When I was at Cerner, ITSI was actually just being released when I was coming over to Splunk. So I never had a chance to run ITSI in my own production environment. And so as much as I liked the product and as much as I had great ideas of what to do, I had no production environment in which to run it. So I was working with GEHA, and I noticed that they were struggling a little bit with getting value from ITSI and adopting it. And so I said to Matt and his team, quid pro quo, you give me access to your production environment for me to test my harebrained ideas, and I will help you out for no cost. So that was what happened, and what we're going to talk about today was actually born out of that partnership. So thanks, Matt, and thanks, GEHA. That was pretty cool.
Thanks, Jeff.
Okay, so I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but at Splunk, we absolutely love our maturity curves, right? Particularly our 4-step maturity curve. So as I was thinking about how to position the challenges that Splunk admins and service owners have with ITSI, I decided to create my own, right? So there's kind of like 4 different milestones that I tend to see a lot of our customers at or needing to get to with ITSI. And the very first one is really simple. It's you're just getting started. You know, maybe you just got your ITSI license, or you know, maybe it's shelfware. That would not be good, but that happens, right? So you don't really know what to do. Clearly at this point in time, ITSI is not providing you a lot of value. So we want to get you right past that. At some point, you're going to identify something in your environment that's important and worthy of monitoring, okay? And so that's when you're got to the point where you're monitoring some of the important stuff. You've built services in ITSI, the KPIs are pretty good, and somebody actually cares about what's showing up there. That's a really good spot to be at inside of ITSI, right? However, at that point in time, you might not be, you have to get to the point where you're thresholding KPIs with a purpose. I can tell you right now, if your strategy is to just choose the default thresholds inside of ITSI, or do what I think some people do in the adaptive thresholding, which is cover their eyes and, you know, point and click and just, I think that one's the right one. That's not a good strategy for how to threshold. So you have to be methodical about it. You have to refine it, and it's a process, right? So at this point in time, you are going to have a really valuable ITSI environment. The service analyzer is going to be turning red when things are bad. It's going to be staying green when things are good. That's a great spot to get to, okay? But at that point in time, you still haven't actually created alerts yet, right? So now I have to go, once I trust the system, it's telling me the right information, now I need to go create alerts inside of ITSI. And as simple as that sounds, that's a little bit of a challenge as well, right? So this talk today is all about getting you from maturity stage 3 to maturity stage 4, okay? And you really do have to be at stage 3 and doing it well in order to move on to stage 4. I would recommend that. All right, so producing meaningful thresholds in ITSI, or sorry, meaningful alerts in ITSI, and really honestly any other monitoring tool can be a bit of a headache. Some of these challenges are ITSI specific, and some of them are totally not ITSI specific, right? So obviously, like I said, thresholds have to be well tuned. You know, you go to a service owner and you ask them when they want to be alerted, and they're like, I don't know, right? When it's broken. So they don't always know, and that can be a bit of a challenge. So there's some scaling challenges that exist, right? So you want to, if you're using a lot of multi-KPI alerts, that's going to eventually not work well for you. There's totally lacking best practice guidance around what you should be doing, and so you know we want to address that. And then last but not least, there's something about clicking that button that's actually going to go page somebody out at 3 in the morning that people just don't want to do, right? So that's some of the reasons why alerting can be a challenge. So our design, I think, is aimed to solve or at least alleviate these problems a little bit, right? It is a blueprint. It's something that you can take and you can copy it, but then we want you to tweak it, customize it, and make it your own. One of the things I love about this design, it's super, super scalable and super maintainable. And so we'll talk more about that. But that can be a challenge, and this really does a good job of addressing that. And it's also going to give you a lot of consistency across all of the services that you have built inside of ITSI to make sure that you have the same strategy in place around how and when to alert. So I don't know if you guys know this or not, but alerting inside of ITSI, it's a 2-step process, okay? The first thing that you have to do is you have to create notable events when there's something interesting going on. And then once I have notable events created, I leverage the notable event aggregation policy rules to say, okay, I want to send an email, or I want to send it to a ticketing system or whatever, right? So it's that 2-step process. When I wrote my first Ensuring Success with ITSI blog series, I pretty much said, hey, 1-to-1, like create a notable event when you're ready to alert and just go do that. When we did this design, I really changed that paradigm a lot. What I said was, hey, let's create let's proliferate our notable events. Notable events are very interesting. They provide context and a source of record for when the service or the KPI wasn't doing what it should have been doing, and that information can be very valuable. So let's not necessarily tie together the creation of notable events with actually paging somebody out, okay? So that's really one of the cornerstone concepts of this design. And the second thing is that we're going to apply attributes to the notable events that we create that are going to be used to drive subsequent decision making, like how to group them and when to alert. Okay, and those attributes are nothing more than field value pairs on the notable event, leveraging all the standard Splunky concepts like lookups and evals and stuff like that. So those are really the two fundamental things that this blueprint design has. Okay, so the way that we broke this down is it's a 5-step process, and I'll walk you through these 5 steps at a high level, and then Matt's actually going to take you through them in a little bit more detail and show you what these look like in his environment. Even though I see some of you taking pictures, that's cool. We are going to give you this information at the end of the talk today. So you're going to see a lot of correlation searches. You're going to see screenshots of build inside of ITSI. Take pictures if you want, but you totally don't have to. You're going to get that information at the end. Okay, so let's go over the 5-step process. In step 1, what we're going to do is we're going to start creating some notable events in the environment. And we're going to leverage something that I think is probably not well known and not well utilized in ITSI, and it's something called correlation searches. Most people know about the multi-KPI alerts. Most people don't know about the correlation searches, okay? So we're going to create a correlation search which starts to identify interesting things going on in the environment. I'll use one example. Let's say that we want to create a notable event anytime a KPI goes to a high or critical status, okay? That's something that we might want to know about in the environment. So that's what step 1 is. Once we get done with step 1, we're going to start creating quite a bit of notable events in the environment. So we need a strategy to start grouping them together. So step 2 is all about how do we group like and related notable events. In step 3, we're going to realize that that first correlation search that we chose, whatever it is, it's good, but we want more. We want to learn more about what's going on in the environment. We want more context. So what we're going to do is we're going to create additional correlation searches that give us that context. And then finally, in steps 4 and 5, we're going to actually go and add the alerting logic in there. So step 4 is about adding an attribute, which is going to drive alerting, and then step 5 is about throttling it. So I will turn it over to Matt to talk about how he did this in his environment.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So I'm going to start off with step 1, talking about creating notable events. So when you first start ITSI and you first install it, you see a lot of options in there about alerting and how to set up notable events. And they look pretty cool. They look very shiny. So you're like, okay, I want to use all these multi-KPI events. I want to use all these different correlation searches. You're like, ooh, I see if CPU and response time go up, I want an alert on that. And then you have all these multi-KPI alerts and all these different correlation searches. And it just gets really difficult to manage that, right? So we're trying to kind of solve that problem. We have like over 150 services in our environment. So we don't want multi-KPI alerts specific for all these different services. We don't want correlation searches specific to all these services. We don't want any aggregation policies that are specific to services. We want to make it just simple and easy. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and create one correlation search. So as Jeff said earlier, was talking about how ITSI is based on notable events and alerting is based off that. Notable events are created by correlation searches. And all correlation searches basically do is you're telling ITSI to run a search, and whatever results it returns, it's going to write to its own specific index just for notable events. And that's called ITSI tracked alerts. So basically what we're going to do with our correlation search is we're going to look at the ITSI summary, an index of every single piece of KPI data that ITSI has given us, and we're going to look for stuff that has, say, peaked up to low, outside of normal, from low on up. So in this correlation search, that's what we did. I wanted to go with KPIs. So if you've ever sat around and played around, and it's a lot of times, the service health score and the waiting for that can sometimes be difficult, especially if you have a service that has like 5, 6, 7 KPIs. Just trying to get it to go to low right, to medium, to high, to critical right can sometimes be difficult unless you use the atomic button and say this KPI goes to 11 and sets it automatically to 0. So what we wanted to do is I wanted to be able to alert specifically on KPIs that were meaningful, that I talked to SMEs about, and they said, you know, when this is red, this is bad stuff. So that's what I wanted to do with that. ITSI does have a base correlation search out that does look at service health scores, but like I said, I wanted to go a little more granular than that. The nice thing with these correlation searches too is you can write your own custom fields in there. So anytime you're writing your own custom fields into this, that means you have information that's specific to your environment in these events, right? So you may want to use something like department value. You may want to use something like is it in another alerting platform. So using the correlation search, you can write that directly into your notable events. So once we already have created what we want that actual search to be, we had to go ahead and we wanted to create it in ITSI. So what we did is we went to the correlation search and made a brand new one. I went ahead and set up a custom time for this. So one of the things is your manager is going to be coming up to you and he's going to be like, you know, I want to get this alert as soon as possible when a bad event occurs, right? So I went ahead and set this correlation search to run every minute. So you're like, okay, this is running 1 minute. There are problems though if you only have it look 1 minute back. And that problem is called monitoring lag. Everything in your environment isn't necessarily going to come into Splunk within 1 minute, right? So that presents a problem. There's a lot of times where maybe it takes a minute or two to be written to the index. Maybe you have PowerShell scripts or other scripts that are pulling in information every 5 minutes. Maybe you have a SOAP call that's running every 5 minutes. We have Azure Event Hub apps, and when we ingest the events, it has a delay of 3 minutes sometimes. Sometimes it can even be more when it's being persnickety, right? So monitoring lag is an enemy here. So what I did is I set the correlation search to look back 1 minute to 10 minutes. That's going to account for the majority of the monitoring lag that I'm going to see in my environment. I don't see many other things that's really going to exceed that unless something itself is inherently wrong with some process. The problem with this though is think about it. If you have a correlation search that's running every minute and looking back 10 minutes, every time that correlation search runs, it's going to find those events over and over and over again. You're going to get inundated with notable events, right? So what we did is, in my original search, I went ahead and just deduped it, and that way I only saw up to 10 duplicate events. That was, for our size, manageable, but it really wasn't the best solution. So working with a consultant from Kincannon named Ian, we went ahead, we found a significantly better search. So if you want to talk to us about that one, talk to me or Jeff at the end, or talk to Ian. It's a really good search, and it completely got rid of that problem. So after we went ahead and did that, I want to point out about setting up custom titles. You want to make a descriptive title and description. Kind of think of who your customer is in this situation, right? A lot of the time it's going to be your operations folks. And your operations folks aren't necessarily always the ones that are digging into the server. You want to be able to have a description here that's telling them exactly what they want to see, right? So it might say like, might want to give them the service name, right? So maybe it's this my web store front end, and then say, hey, on this web front end, we're seeing a lot of 500 errors, right? So that gives them a lot of information. They can look at that and they can say, okay, I know where the problem is. I know what the error is. Is this something I need to page out, right? So here's what happens right after we create the correlation search and have it start running. It's going to start creating descriptive events in ITSI. For example, if we just take a look here at that Azure Event Hub, it's going to tell you the service is the event hub, the KPI is a quota exceeded error, and it's going to tell you exactly what the value is, right? This gives a lot of information for your NOC. It's going to be a lot of information when they create a ticket. It's going to be something simple that they can see and understand in human readable language.
And one thing I want to put an exclamation point on here, guys. This is one correlation search, and it is now creating notable events for all of the KPIs that you have built in your environment, as well as all the KPIs you're about to onboard or all the services you're about to onboard. So when we talk about it being scalable, this is why. When we talk about it being maintainable, this is why, right? One search does it all. You don't have to go into the UI, click, 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 click.
Unless you like going into the UI and click, 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 click. Okay, so the next step I'm going to talk to is grouping related notables. And this is really one of my favorite steps here because it's taking all those notable events we just had and grouping them into like events. So your NOC is going to love you for this. So we do have a problem we still have a problem even after doing step one, right? So we have all those notable events, and even though they're human readable in a large environment or even a mid-sized environment, you're going to have stuff that's a little bit noisy. So it's going to be creating those notable events, and it's going to be coming up on the board, and your NOC's going to be like, okay, I see one from Citrix here, I see one from Citrix down here, is this related? What about the stuff in between? And it's going to make them hard to correlate all that stuff together, right? So what we wanted to do is we wanted to make it simple to correlate all those events together and make it easy for the NOC to see. So what we did is we came up with the process of alert grouping. And all alert grouping is basically we're writing a field into the notable event to say what an alert group is or what the alert group is. So alert groups may be something from like your web store front end. That might be an alert group. Maybe you have one for Citrix. Maybe you have one for a claims paying software or whatnot. That's what the idea of alert grouping is. So when you're in your environment and you're thinking about how do I want to correlate these, there are a lot of different considerations you can use, right? So some of the considerations may be who actually owns these services, right? So who owns Citrix? Who owns the databases that talk to everything else? I mean, it depends on what your organizational structure is, right? You also have different things on how are the services really tied together. Is this like a front end? Are these front end servers? Are these back end servers? Are these services connected as all of it in the cloud? Is all of it in the back end? Or do we have a hybrid of both? So how did we go ahead and add this alert group in? It used one of my favorite things in Splunk, which is Lookup Table. And I'm going to sit here and I'm going to plug something real quick. If you don't have this in your environment, I admit you should probably get this as soon as possible if you ever use lookups. It's called the Lookup Editor app. And what it does is basically it's an app that holds all your lookup tables and you can modify them in real time like a little spreadsheet. Not only that, when you save it there, it's going to have backups, and you can revert to previous versions. So if someone goes in there and goofs up, then you still have the original version. And it's all maintained just simply there in the app. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that. If you use lookups at all, go ahead and get that. Anyway, so we went ahead and used a lookup table. So we set alert groups, and we wanted to tie these to the KPI ID. The KPI ID is something that's inherent, a KV store key that is in ITSI, and every single KPI has one. So we correlate this KPI ID with alert group. And our alert groups here, if you take a look, so we have one, for example, like Azure Network. So that's kind of what I'm thinking with those alert groups. And like I said, in your own environments, kind of think about how you would want to group them.
Yeah. Sorry. I just wanted to point out, so the kind of the power here is that regardless of what service that KPI is ultimately tied to, if you want to group, like services together, or you want to actually split service, KPIs within services apart, by decoupling, by defining an alert group field and decoupling it from that, you get to kind of define what events get grouped together.
Yeah, and you can make this as broad or as narrow as you want to, right? So I want to point to like a web front end, for example, right? Maybe you have a web server and it runs your company website, right? You could group all those together, web front end, the SQL, and all that different stuff. And then when it comes into your NOC, he can look and say, web front end's bad. Click on that, see what alerts are going on, and then be able to farm it out to the correct team, right? Anyway, so the nice thing about this is we went ahead and set an auto lookup. So every time ITSI ran a search for a KPI value, it used these auto lookups and read them as direct fields into the ITSI tracked alerts index. And they will have, for NEEPs later, they will have to be actual fields in there. The second thing is we set it for stash source type. All your summary indexes in ITSI are going to be that source type. So it works for all of them. The other added bonus is you can set up any custom properties you want in this table as well, and they'll be tied to the KPI IDs. Look, up there, department, comms, right? So we want our network team to have this. We don't want this to go out to the DBAs. We can put, if it's in another alerting platform, we can say what the sev level we think is, and if it's a KPI that the team thinks should be alertable. So here's just an example in the ITSI tracked alerts of an event that occurred. We can see here the alert group we just made at .com, pretty generic, and we saw the service times, sites, the KPI 5XX errors count is medium 5. And that's something that gives the NOC a lot of information, and they're able to tie that together on what is actually the problem, where that problem is. So once we go ahead and got the alert group set up in that, we have to go ahead and have ITSI actually group them together. And that's where the notable event aggregation policy does. And what it's going to do is it's going to take all those events from the ITSI tracked alert and it's going to group them all together by a rule that you set. In this case, we're going to make it really simple. I wanted to use Azure as a proof of concept for this, so I went ahead and made alert group matches Azure star. If I wanted for everything in the environment, I just make alert group matches star. That's as easy as it is. It's going to group everything by the alert group value. Broad is good here, right? Keep it simple, right? So if you have it very broad, it's going to filter almost everything you have in the environment through this rule set, and it's going to group them based on the alert groups that you specifically set for them. So here's an example of what we have here. It's going to go ahead and it's going to show us the grouped events here. So we see right here like Azure Storage, Azure Web, Azure Pass. So what the NOC can go up there and see, okay, this is the area where something's a problem. They can click on it. They can see all the events that are coming in and kind of see what's going on. But correlating this is a lot of power, I feel. And then you can, later on, we're going to go on and show you how to take actions based on these correlated event groups. So we've went ahead and we've created notable events. We've showed you how to group them. We're going to go a little bit farther here and show you kind of an additional correlation search that you might think about in your environment. So here's a problem that I think everyone in their environment has. Some KPIs, they just simply flap, right? They produce a significant amount of noise. They produce a significant amount of events. They're kind of annoying. So you have problems where an engineer is out there and he's being alerted over something that's going to just fix itself in 5 minutes. No one wants to be there sitting in a raid and WoW, you know, trying to push progression, and someone comes up and calls you about a response time that fixes itself in 5 minutes. That's a pain in the butt, right? So we went ahead, we have a correlation search that can simply help reduce some of that noise. If you take a look at here, most of the power here is the search percent unhealthy. So this is just going to look and see, make sure that 80% of the polls were actually unhealthy before it alerts. That means you're not going to have some ridiculous response time anomaly, just page out your alert, or one so-called page out someone.
So you can do this today in the multi-KPI alert. That's exactly what the functionality is. But guess how many KPIs it operates on? One. Okay? So if I have 1,000 KPIs in the environment, you're not creating 1,000 multi-KPI alerts, right? So this is one correlation search that implements that logic across all the KPIs in the environment.
And that's the whole point of the method, right? We just want to keep it simple. So what this does is you have a reduction in flapping. You can set them as degraded before, instead of instantly alerting, so it has to happen maybe 3, 4 out of 5 times before someone's going to get called out. That means your engineer is going to be able to successfully get his raid done and maybe get to bed on time, probably not, or he'll be able to spend time with his family, but then he'll be able to be refreshed in the morning without being angry because he got BS alerts. So, right now, we have shown you how to put these notable events on the board, but we haven't actually taken the step to add alerting. And remember what Jeff said earlier, right? It's a very visceral decision because you as an admin that's setting the alerts up, when they go off and they flap, someone is going to come to you and they're going to be ticked off, right? Because you're usually the one that they come to. So, right now we have no alerting. Your NOC is just taking actions on it. They haven't sent out any emails yet. So the next step is we're going to show you how to set up that alerting. So, we're going to add an alerting action to the notable event aggregation policy. And we're going to evaluate the action on a field called alertable. In your original correlation search, I went ahead and we set up a value that said if these conditions occur, then we want to write alertable equals yes. So in this case, for us, I want to see something that's critical, and it's something that's not in another platform, and it's something that our SME has told us this is important. So we set up that alertable field, and then we go into the NEAP, and we want to go ahead and set up email actions, right? So if we take a look here, we're going to go to the email actions here, and we're going to set alertable matches yes. So that means if there's an event that has alertable matches yes, I'm going to go ahead and set up an alert action that's going to send an email. And so the email here, the nice thing about the emails is that you can use tokens in these. So you can pull all the information out of the events from your tracked alerts and your notable events. So you can send the email out and it's going to say this KPI or this service or whatnot, whatever you want to do there. So it's going to be very malleable to what's in your environment. It's going to be able to pull anything and have all the good information in there.
And once again, I'll hit it again. One NEEP for your whole environment, just one.
One.
Right?
We have one NEEP right now. We don't have 2 or 5 or 10. We have one NEEP. So here's an example of the email. So it's to me right there. So this is telling me that, hey, this is an alert that came from Splunk. There's the service site, one of the sites. It's critical, and it tells me what the KPI is, right? So successful provider eligibility checks is critical at a value of 48. It tells me what department it's going to, so apps team here. It tells me what alert group I've given it. It told me what entity is. In this case, it's the service aggregate. But if you have KPIs that are looking at specific entities and do an entity-based thresholding, it'll tell you, you can set it to tell you right there. Tell you the sev level, and it'll tell you the policy. I put that in there because it's really nice to be able to do troubleshooting that way. So we've gotten to the point where we're sending out an email. Unfortunately, in ITSI, sometimes things aren't quite that easy, and it's very easy to send multiple emails over and over and over again, right? So when we were sitting and trying to learn how to throttle this, we had some problems with some of the out-of-the-box options. So we could set it to email on the very first event. The problem is, that's the very first event in the group. So if it's critical later on, we didn't get an email. So that was a problem as well. If you set it to, say, alert under this condition, the problem is a lot of the stuff on the left side, it's only going to be on per event basis, right? It's not going to be as a whole group. So if you keep getting that KPI as red and it keeps sending an alert, an event every 5 minutes, you need to pop off an email every 5 minutes. Who here wants an email alert every 5 minutes, right?
I do. Oh, I know.
Well, Jeff's weird like that, so. So we wanted to solve this problem, and so we went a little bit outside of the box to do this. We created a second correlation search. And what does this search do? Basically, it makes a field we called alert trigger. And so what this alert trigger correlation search did was simple. It looked through a group to find the first event that had alertable on it. And then once it saw alertable, it wrote a new field called alert trigger. It then filtered out once you had that occur and the first alert trigger was written, then after that, it would not write alert trigger again until the whole group was closed or you had a brand new group.
And this is the one correlation search that we're not going to share with you later, so you have to write it on your own.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, no, we're actually going to share this. But the whole idea here is we're using event stats to basically just stream through the events, and then once it finds that first one, it's going to write alert trigger, and it's going to say yes, and then after that, it's going to, we're going to filter out everything else that has alertable. So, once we've got this, the next step is super simple. So the only thing you have to do is you go back to that original NEEP, and you change alertable to alert trigger. That's it. That's all you really have to do. The second thing is I put a little, another field in here called event diff. So it was telling me how far it was from when the event was written to what it is now. This was important because think about that stream stats. If you have it going back 12 or 24 hours and it writes one alert trigger, as that falls off, it's going to want to write another alert trigger for something that's 24 hours old. So I put that in there, and I wanted to make sure that only events that were like within the next hour would alert on it. So boom, we've gone through the 5 steps. We've made notable events. We've grouped them together. We showed you a little bit how to get rid of some of the known flappers. We showed you how to set up alerting and how to go ahead and throttle those alerting. So this is what we did in our environment, you know. So one of the things I saw as an opportunity here when we were creating this is we had been moving towards Azure, right? And so we didn't have all our alerting in-house at that point. We had a third-party consulting contract, and they were doing the monitoring and letting us know when things went down. I saw this as a prime opportunity to A, show this method worked, and B, be able to bring something in-house. So what we did is I went ahead and created a bunch of KPIs for all our Azure services. I consulted with our Azure SMEs, and we set the thresholding. We decided, hey, which ones are important, which ones are not. And then we went ahead and set those up in ITSI. I then applied this method to it, and we started practicing doing test alerts. Once our Azure SMEs were happy with the test alerts, we went live with it. So management was happy with this. They were very pleased with that. It was not only working faster than what we were having the consulting company do, we were getting more accurate alerts, and alerts that we weren't simply getting from the consulting company. Also, after that, you know, if we had something that was doing better than the consulting company, that means we can cut off the contract. So we saved our company some money, and our management was quite happy about that. So what are some of my future hopes and dreams and how to expand this out of just what I've shown you? So it is nice we had one notable event aggregation policy. That's it. We had one correlation search, and then if we decided to put more in for other situations, we had the opportunity to do that. But really, you could do it one correlation search, two correlation searches, and one need. The one that looks for alertable events, the ones that looks for alert trigger. And that's all you really needed. But we don't necessarily want to stop there, right? So we set up a lot of stuff in ITSI, but as with a lot of other companies, that may not necessarily be the only platform we have that sends out alerts. So one of the things I wanted to do in the future is kind of just correlate all those together, right? So we have Orion, and Splunk has an app. So what I want to do is you can take those events that are coming from Orion and pump them into Splunk. And then you can take those events and you can use the alert grouping mechanism to correlate them to everything else that's in ITSI. Think about how you can do that in your environment, right? Think of all the other platforms. Are you getting any alerts through SNMP traps, right? Probably. Also, if you have any APMs out there that are supported by Splunk, you probably have some information that are coming in through that. Other add-ons that are getting other add-ons that are getting stuff from maybe some of the cloud services as well. So any of those events, you can really take that and apply that and use the alert grouping to correlate it up so you're not going to see those in the event viewer.
Yeah, and then I'll take this second future hope and dream. At the end of the day, the decision around when to send an alert in this design that we've laid out, it's still rules-based, right? It's still something that you have to make the decision on what's the right time to do that. However, I think that we could take this design and take it to the next level. And so even though this was a security talk that was done last year, this one really opened up my eyes. So if you go look at Conf last year, go listen to this, say goodbye to your big alert pipeline and say hello to your new risk-based approach. This design that was laid out here last year for security is completely and totally applicable for the IT space as well. And that's the next direction I would like to go with this. So how does that work? Basically, what you would do is every time we create a notable event, we're not going to say alertable yes or no. We're going to give it some numeric score. That numeric value represents the relative risk that notable event has to the overall group. So as more and more notable events are being grouped together that have some sort of a risk value associated with them, I can actually go and sum them all up and say this group here, this episode has an aggregate risk level of 406. And that's greater than my 400 level threshold. And so I want to go and alert on that. So you start to bubble up the riskiest services or episodes or groups or whatever inside of the environment to go look at. So this probably comes as absolutely no surprise, but we told you we were going to give you all the information, and all of the information is laid out inside of the 5-part blog series that I wrote, a blueprint for Splunk ITSI alerting. So if you haven't seen that blog series, go check it out. It goes over the 5 steps and all of the build and everything. And if you guys want to talk to us about it more, we'd be happy to do that. I am also very happy to say that I just got approved to spend a pretty good chunk of the next 3 or 4 months of my life taking this design and actually integrating it inside of ITSI as a content pack. So I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this or not, but you do have the ability to download some content packs inside of ITSI. They're available via our documentation. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take all the correlation searches and all the neat build and all that stuff, and we're going to actually package it up as an ITSI content pack so that you don't even need to read the blog post. You can download that content pack, install it in your environment, pick and choose which correlation searches you want to turn on to drive alerting in your environment, and bingo, bango, bongo, you're done. That's it.
Yep. Looks like we have about 5 minutes for questions. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
So first of all, thank you for that 5-step framework, because it's been a real lifesaver in a couple places. Having brought the tool in, it's really helpful. One question I have is, you had the one thing where you were calculating the basically like the percent fail with samples.
Correct.
Right, and you were mapping against that. Have you thought or looked into the idea of using a similar approach for something like entity level threshold exceptions or anything like that?
So I'll take that one. The question is, I'm going to repeat the question for the recording. The question is, have we considered correlation searches that are going to start looking at the entity level? Do you want to, did I get that right? Or do you want to?
Well, no, that's, so here you're looking at the KPI violations and the percentage violations of that, and that gives you some variability, I guess, based on the lookup table. You're able to say 3 of the last 5 samples or however many failed, and that's you know across the board. So one of the things we see a challenge with ITSI is it's hard to do entity level threshold exceptions where, you know, like there's this one odd man out and they say, oh, he's always high, don't set that threshold there, and you can't do adaptive at entity level.
I think what you would have to do in that situation, and it's a little clunky, so you'd have to kind of identify, you'd have to know which entities were problem children to begin with, and you could create like a field that says like, let's just call it problem child, and you can go through and you can say, is this going to have, are there going to be any problem children in this event, right? And you can go down more in the weeds on that lookup table and correlate stuff like that.
But and now I get it a little bit better as well. And I could totally see creating either another lookup or leveraging attributes that we have on the entity itself inside of the rule to kind of start excluding specific ones. Yeah.
Because after the success with this, we were thinking of applying the same approach to something like that.
Okay.
So maybe we should talk more about it.
Yeah, sure.
Sir? Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, the content updates. Yeah. Oh, no, there's no, so the question is are the content updates a cost or are they free? And the answer is they're free. Yeah, so there won't be a cost associated with that.
Yes, sir?
A lot of this is driven by that lookup table. When you have lots of different IT team admins creating services and they're in charge of grouping the different services and doing the normalization, do you guys have a strategy for how to self-service that table? Would you run it through yourself?
So what I do with that table is every night, I'm sorry. So the question was, if you have a lot of different ITSI admins in your environment and they're all making services at the same time, what's the best way basically to manage that lookup table, right? So what I do in the environment is, even though we only have 2 admins in the environment, we both create services. What I do is every night at midnight, I have a search run that adds stuff into that lookup table and then alphabetizes it. So that's one of the ways you can do it. So every time you see a new service, it's going to pull it up into that lookup table. Your admin's probably going to have to go in and determine what alert group it is, but you also can, if you have a strategy based on, like, let's say we have something in the alias or whatnot, you could create a search that would say, add this alert group to this service as it's made based on other attributes from the entities or whatnot.
Yeah, trying to segregate out, this set of KPIs or searches is going to be fed from this lookup and this one's fed from this lookup, so you can manage those separately. I mean, I get it. I'm not planning on going there. But that could be a customization that you would do.
Any other questions? Yes, sir?
The CPB integration that you definitely try to use this approach with ServiceNow as the origin of the group?
We haven't used this approach yet with ServiceNow. That's something we're actually planning in the future. We haven't had a lot of access to that yet. That's something we're planning once we get more mature with that.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. So the question is, have we considered ServiceNow, the integration of ServiceNow to pull in information associated with the entities and the groups? That's a really good idea. There is already existing functionality. For those of you that don't know this, there's already existing functionality using the ServiceNow TA to pull that information into Splunk and then automatically build all of your services and KPIs and tie the right entities to those. We have a video online actually that walks through doing that. So outside of this specific design, that's something that you guys could do. Pulling that information in and incorporating it here is good too.
Hey everyone, thank you for your questions. Me and Jeff are where are we going to meet up?
We can stick around for a few more minutes in case anybody has any questions.
Thanks everybody.